was
beneficial ownership registers. Yeah.
yeah, beneficial ownership registers. Yeah, so it was really I mean, where did this start bubbling away? We had I think it did really come out of the UK actually more than anywhere, and it was with the person of significant control registers, wasn't it? That came in the UK, and
Yeah,
then
it was going back to
yeah,
David Cameron. It was
always Cameron,
David
isn't
Cameron.
it? It was always Cameron. Although
Yeah.
there was one a lady politician as well who was really going after the Channel Islands, but yeah, it's always Cameron, isn't it? We can trace all our woes back.
Margaret Hodge, perhaps.
Margaret Hodge, yes.
Yeah, as a Labour, Margaret Hodge. She's
He just
always,
had, yeah, she had
yeah.
a bone, a beef with the Channel Islands. So she was, for some reason, really being selected to drive that. So then you had the persons of significant control register come in the UK. You then had the UK company register becoming public, and then you've had the pressure on the Crown dependency jurisdictions to put registers in. And they really paid lip service to that. And I think we're hoping it was all going to go away, or Margaret Hodge would lose their seat and just disappear. And they were like, oh yeah, we'll definitely do that. Don't worry, we'll get it done. And and then of course what's happened is we've had this case in Europe, which has said, well, no, actually this is going way too far and is a clear breach of data privacy rights for people. And then you've had jurisdictions like the BVI go, okay, yeah, well, we're scrapping what we said because the EU have said that's illegal. So everybody sort of sighed a bit of a sigh of relief, but I don't think the matter's quite over yet. And I think this is probably the most worrying thing for a lot of people, right? Is if those registers were to be publicly searchable and open, especially when they've even talked about doing them for trusts. But what do you see sort of happening in the UK? Because really, this is all coming out of the UK, I think.
Yes, so I think for whatever reason, David Cameron thought that this transparency was a good policy for him to be able to take leadership and ownership of on the global stage and achieve something. It's very much framed as being an anti-corruption initiative. And the UK steamed ahead with persons of significant control, so that we've always had UK company registry. You can find out who the shareholders of a company are, but very often shares are not registered in the name of the true beneficial owner. They might be registered in the name of a nominee or a trustee, and so it was possible for people to keep from public their ownership of companies. And then similarly with land, historically, yes, we've got a land registry that you can search and you can see in whose name is the legal title to land registered. But again, that is not always the true beneficial owner of the land. It could be held by a nominee, it could be held by a trustee. Also, if the land was owned by a company, then if you don't know who owns the company, you also don't know who the beneficial owner are. So I think what's come together in the UK is that now, in theory, you have to put the identity of the true beneficial owner of companies on Companies House. And you also now, where you have a company which owns land in the UK, it also has to register with Companies House. Even if it's a foreign company, it has to register with UK Companies House and say who its owners are. There's still it's not always the case that you're going to be able to see who the owner of a company is, or who everyone who has an interest in the company. And also where there's been trusts and nomineeships involved. Again, you haven't yet been able necessarily to see the beneficial owners, although some further changes have come in to mean that more beneficial owners are going to have to put themselves on the register.
It's pretty broad, isn't it? You can even get the financial statements off, and you can also see the history. So even if you want to change to take your name off and put somebody else on, that history is still there. So it's quite a wide, it is quite wide open, the company registry in the UK, I think.
I mean, I think there's a sort of philosophical question of how much this information should be public or not. So, with land, there is an argument that the country should know who owns the land in the country, or you should know who your neighbor is. So there could be, arguments on that.
Yeah, and I think most
line.
people are sympathetic to that one, aren't they? It's the key resource of any country, and I think most people are sympathetic to that. But what they don't want is their private family, their family money. It's not even. I don't think it's even the corporate. Sometimes it's more the family stuff, isn't it? That should not be. Some YouTuber can go and do a big search and find out, who owns what and this and that, and stick it all over the internet, right? I think that's the concern.
Yeah, well, then there's also I think you have different categories. So then you have at the other extreme, bank accounts, where with FATCA and CRS, information about individuals and their bank accounts is being distributed around and shared around the world. Now, that information is not publicly available, but people still see it as a breach of data privacy and creating a risk to them, either hacking risk or misuse of that information by governments sort of against their own citizens. So there's ongoing legal challenges to FATCA and CRS as being a sort of fundamental breach of privacy. And I don't think many people in the UK would think that they have a right to see the details of everyone's bank accounts. And then in terms of whether the government should be able to see the details of people's bank accounts to make sure that they're not money laundering, not evading tax, there's probably a bit of a divide of opinion. But I don't think anyone would think that information should be publicly available, and there's no suggestion that it will be. And even it's the sharing among governments is being challenged. On corporate beneficial ownership registers, as you say, there's been this decision in the EU that it is a breach of EU law for beneficial ownership of companies to be publicly available. So far, this decision seems to be largely being ignored. And the UK, which of course now left the EU, but UK law still is a reflection of EU law, because we've carried over EU law into UK law. It hasn't been changed. So if that EU decision was right, then it should be right in the UK as well. But there hasn't yet been any suggestion that the UK is going to row back on what it's done with beneficial ownership. Some of the offshore jurisdictions are, I think, trying to create what they think should be the new normal by saying, okay, we are going to have require you to file information about beneficial ownership, but it will only be available publicly when there's a legitimate interest in someone having access to it. But where that includes journalists, investigative journalists, that seems to me to open up a huge grey area and a risk to people's data.
Yeah.
So probably, even if that's where we end up, which is that information is disclosed to the authorities, and then is only available to others if they have a legitimate interest. That's going to still leave some people very uncomfortable about the privacy of their information, but it's probably the reality that they're going to have to live with.
It's interesting when you look at these hacks that have happened and these big data leaks in the offshore world. The hackers, they don't go for the head office in London or the head office in Switzerland. They always go for the branch in some little island, right? So yeah, there's information that's going to be all stored centrally somewhere in the BVI and all that.
Yes, and I mean obviously
target, right?
Panama Papers, all of these different leaks, and I forget the names of all of them now because we've had a few. Yeah. They've, regardless of the legal position on beneficial ownership, those hacks just blow a massive hole in it anyway. So,
although I thought was it the last one, the Paradise Papers, actually kind of fizzled out, didn't it? It didn't really bite. I think most people were like, yeah, old news, heard of that before. I think a lot of clients were pretty angry, I think, with our industry for not sticking up for the clients, which I think it's been pleasing to see on the beneficial owner register that there have been some lawyers like the Philippe and Miss Condrea who have sort of led the charge against this and stuck up for the clients. But I think on a lot of those data leaks, clients were a bit like, my stuff's all out there anyway. And so it was quite interesting. It didn't have quite the effect like the Panama Papers and the one that came out of the Appleby leak. But yeah.
Yeah, I think there wasn't anything particularly scandalous that was revealed or newsworthy, so it fizzled out.
Yeah, exactly right. So I mean, maybe that's a bit of good news that there's kind of not. Maybe that might motivate these journalists less, right? They're not going to get quite the headlines that they used to, right? So I think something happened that week when it came out as well. That was, what was that, September 21. I think that it was bad timing as well. There was another big piece of news that came out, but they were a bit unlucky with their timing. But yeah, so yeah, okay, well, yeah, I think that, just to conclude maybe on that, probably the whole public beneficial owner register thing has disappeared offshore. Probably could see the UK maybe pushing it. We've got the Corporate Transparency Act in the US happening, but again, that's a private register. But even now the Americans are now recording names. So it's a sort of very, very small trend. It's not really something that's moving very, very quickly, I think, is it? So it's probably not something.
Yeah, but so that's the other notable trend, though, over the last few years is the fact that the US has not shared its information with other jurisdictions. So US has not joined CRS. US has FATCA to gather everything from around the world. So the use of the US as effectively an offshore secrecy jurisdiction is definitely a phenomenon that's happened.
Yeah, staggering. Although I did read that I think they've signed agreements with some of the Latin American countries now, like Argentina, to exchange data on those individuals. So with the Latin countries, maybe that's changing. So maybe that will continue other places. I know Switzerland's been has put pressure on America a few times, saying, we need to see information on Swiss residents as well. And I think they are amending the tax agreement, the FATCA agreement, model agreement, to have some sort of information flowing back, or maybe on different topics. So I think, yeah, America is under a bit of pressure to send information back as well now.
Yeah, and people also have to decide that America is a jurisdiction where they want to place their wealth, structure their wealth, have the Americans knowing about their wealth. So
yeah, I always say about America, it can work very well, but you have to know what you're doing. you have to know what you're doing, because yeah, you can get in trouble pretty quickly there. So I wouldn't normally recommend it unless somebody's got a clear rationale and understanding. Cool. Okay, well maybe we can wrap this up. What